This meeting is being recorded, so if this is uncomfortable for you, please feel free to stay off camera, or this will be available later on, and you can watch it on the recording. I just want to welcome everyone to our public workshop number 1, our first public workshop engagement on the Fountain Street Corridor Study. I'll allow our consultant team to, led by CDM, our firm CDM Smith, with us tonight. And we'll let them go over the scope and the breadth. And you'll remember us coming to the West Hills management team. This is before the coronavirus in March started in this year. This was, I believe, one of my last public meetings that I attended, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe the exact dates will be in the slide deck, but it's a very exciting opportunity to look at a state route that we've been receiving a lot of interest and feedback on. And before we turn it over to the consultants, I'd love to introduce and ask Representative Pat Dillon if she would like to unmute, and if you feel free and say hello and welcome us this evening. I'd be more than happy to have you say some welcoming remarks. Hello, Representative Dillon. Thank you for joining.
Hi, it's great to be here. I literally just logged off of another Zoom meeting that lasted 2 hours. So I'm very committed to being here, but my mind isn't totally clear yet. I am always excited when something positive is being done about the problems that we're facing on Whaley Avenue, where we've had 2 deaths up by Davis Street, and on Fountain Street, where, well, I'll see what your plan is, but some of these issues are longstanding, and I'm excited about any effort you're engaged in.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for your tireless efforts on behalf of the district and on behalf of the roadways in New Haven. With that, I will turn this over to David Sousa to kick us off from our CDM Smith team. And I just want to acknowledge that Stephen Dudley from our partners at the South Central Regional Council of Governments is with us tonight. Thank you for joining us, Steve. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave Sousa. Thank you, David.
Sure, Doug Sharratt is going to kick it off.
Forgive me, Sharratt. So sorry.
No worries, no worries. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be in front of the city. And this is a great project for us. And we've been at it for several months now. And as Doug, you rightly pointed out, that we met last in February, and that was probably the last public meeting even we had since this whole thing happened. So we do want to go back and revisit some of the slides we showed them at that time. It was just boards that we showed you at that time. Want to revisit some of those, and then Becca and Dave are going to walk you through the project. I'm just going to kick the project study area just so everyone knows where we are studying and what are our limits. So going through the agenda with the introduction of the project, which I'm going to be doing most of it. And then Becca is going to go through the existing conditions and identification of needs. And then Dave's going to take it from there to having an open discussion of where we are and what we're looking from the residents and everyone in the neighborhood. So the study area, the corridor is Fountain Street corridor. We are looking at about 1.5 mile stretch of Fountain Street, starting from the west, just under the Wilbur-Cross Parkway side, going easterly to its terminus at Bailey Avenue. The whole stretch right there, it's State Route 243, as it was pointed out. It's a state highway in this section. And then we're also looking at a portion of Bailey Avenue. I believe there was a corridor study done on Bailey Avenue several years ago by the South Central Region Council of Governments. This kind of takes, there's some common areas on Bailey Avenue that were looked before, but we are only looking about 1/2 mile, 1/4 to 1/2 mile section on Bailey, that just to the west of Harrison. And that's mainly to tie into the Fountain Street corridor. So it's kind of a short stretch on Bailey that we are looking as part of this project. So I'll then turn it over to Becca now, and she can go through the rest of the slides and the existing conditions.
Perfect, thanks, Sharratt. So as Sharat mentioned, we did start this study some time ago. So the traffic counts that we conducted for this project were actually conducted in 2019. So they were conducted pre-COVID. We conducted traffic counts during the weekday morning from 7 to 9, the midday peak hour from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., and the evening peak hour from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. So from these traffic counts, what we found is that there are approximately 10,000 vehicles on Fountain Street west of Emerson, 6,600 vehicles east of Emerson, and then Whaley Avenue has 14,000 vehicles to the west and 20,000 to the east. And one of the interesting pieces that the ATR data also provided us with was the 85th percentile speed information. And so if you can, it might be difficult for you to see, but in the green small dots and in the red small dots on Whaley and in Fountain Street, what this represents is the 25-mile-per-hour posted speed limit. And then you can see Fountain Street transitions from 25 miles per hour to a solid line, which represents 30 miles per hour, again to a solid dotted line, which represents 35 miles per hour. So where Whaley in the study area stays 25 miles per hour, Fountain Street does transition between 25 to 30 and then to 35 miles per hour. So what we found from our information was that Fountain Street, the 85th percentile speeds ranged from 4 to 12 miles per hour over the posted speed limit, and Whaley Avenue, they ranged from 5 to 11 miles per hour over the posted speed limit. So from the comments that we heard at the previous meeting, this is what the data is showing, is the speeds are significantly faster than what the streets are posted for. If you can go to the next slide, Carl. Perfect. So as we begin to look at improvements for all users through this corridor, it's important for us to understand what the existing facilities are out there now, and not just what facilities that are out there for vehicles, but what's out there for pedestrians, for cyclists, and for transit users. So we conducted the fieldwork for the study area again last year in 2019, actually during November. So it was pretty much a year ago today where we were out there conducting our fieldwork, our observations. What we did notice is that there is sidewalk through almost the entire corridor. However, there are pieces that are in need of some repair. The crosswalks are faded. Some of the sidewalk ramps either don't have push buttons since they're missing, or the push buttons are further away than we would like to see. We did notice, which was really great, is that there is an RRFB at the Morrow Sheridan Magnet School. We do wish cars yielded at it a little bit better, so maybe we can talk about some solutions there, but it is a great thing to see. And we also noticed that there are no bike facilities except for the Sharrows that are on Central Avenue, even though there were heavy volumes of bikes using the Fountain Street and Whaley Avenue corridors. And then there are transit routes that go through this study area corridor. In pink, you can see that there's Route 246. In yellow, you can see 243. And in red, you can see 241. While there are numerous bus stops along the route, there are only 2 bus shelters. And there is also Sunday service from CT Transit, but it is it's very limited throughout the corridor. So those were some of the observations that we had. Moving on to the crash data. So using the Connecticut Crash Data Repository, we looked at the crashes from 2016 to 2018. So I don't think it's going to capture some of the crashes that were mentioned earlier in the discussion. What it did capture is that the intersections of Fountain at Whaley have 73 crashes, you can see highlighted in red. And then the intersections of Fountain at Vista, Dayton, and Forest, the 3 of those offset clustered intersections that are grouped pretty funky, they have a total of 91 crashes. And the intersection of Fountain at Central has 22 crashes, and 3 of them were bikes. So 14% of those crashes over those 3-year period were cyclist crashes. So that's definitely something we need to consider when we're looking at improvements moving forward for that intersection. And then Fountain Street, just west of Forest, had another cyclist crash. So that's something we want to look at. And there were also 2 pedestrian crashes, and those were at Lakeview Terrace and Davis Street on Fountain Street. And both of those occurred when it was darker or dimming conditions and it was raining. So again, that's just something we want to look at. Maybe there's improvements to lighting, maybe bump outs, different treatments that we can look at for that intersection. And after we did our inventory of the existing conditions, we looked at the crash data, we took a look at the existing vehicular traffic operations. And we did this using a software called Synchro. And what that does is it takes a look at the delay and the queues, so how long you're waiting in traffic at the light to advance through the intersection. So this is just a high level, similar to a report card or a traffic signal. A and B is good, F is bad. So green is good, red is bad when you're looking at this figure here. So this diagram actually correlates very well with the crash diagram. So where you saw the high crashes at the intersections of Fountain, at Vista and Dayton and Forest, and then I did forget to mention the number of crashes at Whaley, at Blake and Phillip, that's where you see the worst level of service operation. So again, yep, so at that Whaley, at Blake and Phillip intersection, there were 43 crashes. And what you're seeing on the screen is in the morning and midday and afternoon peak hours, there's level of service Fs at that intersection. And again, at the intersection of Fountain, at Vista, Dayton, and Forest, there's level of Fs and Es and Fs during the morning and afternoon peak hour. And so that's a high level overview of how traffic does operate through this project area. One of our goals of this project area is to coordinate the intersections and put together a timing pattern to move vehicles more efficiently down so they're not constantly getting stuck at red lights one after another. And with that, I will, oh, nope, sorry. So the key issues just summarized, I mentioned a lot of them as we were going through this presentation. So there's congestion. So at the Whaley Avenue, at Phillip Street and Blake Street intersections, again, that Fountain Street, at Vista Terrace, Dayton Street and Forest Road. So those intersections where they're closely spaced, they're signalized and they're clustered. So they're just very large intersections. So there's congestion, and then there's, again, as you see down below, there's crashes. The speeds, people are traveling up to 12 miles per hour above that posted speed limit. And then there are those bicycle and pedestrian crashes. So those vulnerable, most vulnerable users that we really need to be careful with and protect. The pedestrian crossing issues. So we discussed some of these where we noticed that ramp slopes exceed the recommended 8.33%. The sidewalk condition was just, I mean, you can see in the picture, it's in a little state of disrepair. There's some tripping hazards. A few spots are narrower than what we would like to see. Crossing time is inadequate based on the new timing standards, and push buttons are missing or further away from the ramp than would be preferred. And then again, the faded crosswalk paint, which is very evident in that photo. Bike travel. So as we mentioned, when we are completing the assessment of the existing conditions, there are heavy volumes of cyclists that utilize these roadways, and there are no bike facilities except for those that occurred, those that are on Central Avenue. And then the high vehicular speeds coupled with the on-street parking and the potential for dooring in cyclists. And then parking, we also completed a parking study. We completed the parking study during the daytime hours, and then after people were home from work or out at restaurants, so around 7 p.m., we captured what we saw to be underutilization on several blocks on Fountain Street that typically occurred as you got away from the downtown business district and you move towards more primarily the residential area. And one other piece that we did notice is that the signage was in poor condition, and this is a great low cost, high impact improvement just to make people aware of where they can park safely, what the travel lanes are. You know, we want to make sure that the signs are free of stickers, graffiti, that the reflectivity is still there, and that the signposts are still intact. And so now with that, I will turn it over to Dave Sousa.
Thank you, Becca. So my discussion will be about complete streets, and complete streets is a practice that's relatively new. The Complete Streets Manual of the City of New Haven, which, by the way, is one of the first and one of the best streets manual in the country, and it's used as a model by many communities. This was published nearly, or maybe over 10 years ago now. So Complete Streets has been around. It is effectively a way to understand that our streets need to function for the operations, for the convenience of all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, and motorists. And doing so makes us look more carefully at all of these sometimes competing needs. The street is only so wide and there's only so much real estate to put in different facilities for each of those classifications of travel. But we nonetheless have the means to design our streets to be more cognizant of multiple needs and multiple modes of travel. So we've broken our assignment of, so to back up, the Complete Streets Design Manual of the City of New Haven provides for an understanding of this need to reduce travel speeds, to increase safety for all users, and identifies different tools that are appropriate throughout the city. Some of the tools are appropriate for arterials, some are appropriate for local streets. Not all the tools are appropriate for all streets, in other words. So we need to be very discreet and careful and understand the intent of the tools and where it could be best applied. But suffice it to say that the principal reason for many of the tools is to slow traffic, to make motorists more aware that they're sharing the streets with other people that don't have giant vehicles that weigh 3,000 pounds. So we divided, next slide please, Carl. We divided our Complete Streets toolbox for this study, for the Fountain Street study, into 4 categories: pedestrian enhancements, vehicular speed controls, bicycle enhancements, and green infrastructure or bio-swales and rain gardens. So I'm going to go through each of these tools. I'm not going to dwell a lot on them, but feel free to ask questions after the presentation on any one tool. In fact, our objective for this workshop is to understand the community's sentiment about what the opportunities are, what the issues are in the corridor, where you think there may be specific issues that we may not be aware of, and what you think is some appropriate tools. And then there may be other tools besides what we're showing tonight. So keep that in mind as I'm going through about where we could apply these tools and where you think the need is highest for these tools. So let's start with pedestrian enhancements. And the first one is high visibility crosswalk. So this is simply a crosswalk that has more color, more dynamic interest to make it more visible, more prominent to motorists. And an important thing about that prominence and the need for visibility is lighting, that we can't forget that it's very important to have lighting at both sides of the street so the entire crosswalk is illuminated at night. This is one example, but there are many different ways to combine colors. Most of the crosswalks on Fountain Street and on side streets are the ladder or the continental style crosswalks, but there's still opportunity to add color and interest and dynamics to that. Next slide, please. Mid-block crosswalks, very similar to crosswalks, except that mid-block crosswalks are not located at an intersection of 2 streets. They are located between intersections where there may be a demand because there's a school or another high pedestrian destination. It's really important to design mid-block crosswalks very carefully because motorists aren't expecting there to be pedestrians at those locations. So they're less aware that one may be desiring to cross. So we typically over-illuminate mid-block crosswalks. We provide curb extensions. We provide, and I'll talk more about that in another tool. We provide flashing beacons and even pedestrian crossing signals. Next slide, please. Curb extensions are, as they imply, some people call them bump outs. I like the term bump outs. Basically, you're extending the sidewalk into the street. Not into the travel lane, of course, because cars and other motors need to travel, but into where the parking would be at that location. They're really very effective because they reduce the crossing distance from one side of the street to the other. They put the pedestrian in a very prominent location so that they're not hidden by parked cars. They're much visible to motorists. And it also slows cars down because you're restricting the amount of space that they have to move. A lot of cars, if you provide very wide radii and no curb extensions, will travel sometimes 30 miles an hour around an intersection, which is way too fast, and not carefully considering who might be waiting to cross or actually crossing. And these kind of devices, I guess, tool, can be done either with curbs, as the name implies, or they can be done much more effectively and cheaply in a more tactical manner. Tactical urbanism is another way to phrase something that is done low cost. and that is with paint and with the cones. So the image on the left is from another study the city of New Haven did for, this happens to be Fairhaven. It shows how you could use different colored pavement and painted lines and reflective, flexible lane delineators to delineate the bump outs. So they're very, very effective, very low cost. The cars, won't blow a tire on them because if they hit anything, the lane delineators will pop back up. Next slide, please. Pedestrian refuge islands, a little tricky because you need a median. It can be a very short median. Very effective though, because if you have multiple lanes for pedestrians to travel, some pedestrians be disabled or not have the ability to cross quickly, may not make it across the street in time with a crossing cycle. So this provides a place for them to stop and rest. It also provides safety and security in between the different legs of the crosswalk. Next slide, please. Down pedestrian signals are something most people I think are familiar with. They have the typical cross, no cross sign for pedestrians. They can be button activated, in other words, pedestrian activated, or they can be on timers. But the neat thing is that they count down from either 10 or 15 to 0 so that the pedestrians knows how much time they have to cross and they can safely proceed if they know they can make it to the other side or they believe they can make it to the other side before the signal changes. And there's an audible signal as well for people who might be sight impaired. So they're very effective. They're very, very nice to have, very important to have to make streets safer for all users, including people who may not be, as mobile and or visual impaired. Next slide, please. Next slide, Carl.
Is you don't see the?
I see P6. Oh, thank you. So the next one is shared spaces, pedestrian only streets. There's not a lot of examples of this in New Haven. We believe that this is mainly a European thing, but increasingly we see it. And it's a really neat way to understand that not all streets need to be open to motor vehicles at all times, that some streets can be closed to pedestrians and to cyclists, and to be more of a festival street, to provide for places where the community can meet and gather, hold, fairs and festivals, or have food trucks, or have outdoor dining. They're really a great way to understand that you can close the street off during the times when pedestrian travel is greatest and allow for the street to open, for example, when deliveries then needed to different establishments along the street, or as well to allow for emergency access, of course. This is intriguing because at the last meeting that Doug referred to in February, the community management team meeting, where we just presented the same show more or less to understand what people's issues and opportunities are on the corridor. Somebody mentioned converting a section of Central Avenue to a pedestrian-only street, kind of like a plaza. So that's something that fostered this slide. So we'd love to talk more about that if people are interested. Next slide, please. Movable parklets. This is, I think, a fascinating new technique. It's only been around for a few years, and New Haven has embraced it, and some facilities, some private stores or restaurants or shops have taken over parking spaces and put in a parking deck or other improvements that effectively bring the life of the sidewalk into the street, into the parking lane. The reason why they're really effective and why they're in this deck of tools for complete streets is that they're so animated that people slow down. We're all creatures of our environment and we're all social creatures. When we see these activities happening on the street, like cafes and color and activity, we naturally and intuitively slow down. So they're terrific because they expand up the ability for merchants to show their wares on the sidewalk. They provide space for restaurants to have cafes and expand their outdoor dining, and they slow traffic. So they're one of the best devices since sliced bread. Next slide, please. Speed humps, I think we're all aware of that. In fact, there are a couple on Ramsdale Street that I think are very effective. We need to be judicious because they shouldn't be applied everywhere. And there's some concerns about snowplow damage and such, but they're a way to provide an actual, I guess the term is intervention to slow traffic because it provides that vertical deflection. That if you don't slow down, you're going to bump your head on the ceiling of your car and you're not going to like it. So I think they're very good on streets that are principally low speed and mainly residential. Next slide, please. Dynamic speed display signs, I think are also very effective. And these aren't terribly expensive. They're very effective because they're dynamic. And I think people don't pay attention to speed signs or other signs because they get used to them, but this one actually tells you your speed and it flashes, it has color, it has lights. So slowing down because we all don't realize sometimes the speeds we're going or traveling if we're following another car or if we're just not being attentive to our environment. They're terrific. So something that maybe Doug could let us know how they might be used in New Haven. Next slide, please. Speed tables or raised intersections. The image at the top is from Stanford at the Stanford Transportation Center on State Street. The one on the bottom is in New Haven on Whitney at Audubon Street. Effectively, we raise the street level to the sidewalk elevation. So the entire street where the intersection is elevated. So there's a ramp section, kind of like a speed hump going into the crosswalk. So cars slow down before the crosswalk. They stay slow across the top of the table and then they drop back down on the other side. So they're really cool because they slow cars down and because people are 6 inches taller because they're crossing on a crosswalk that's now at sidewalk elevation. So we're more visible, especially children. So I think they're terrific. They're not inexpensive, so that's a factor. Next slide, please. Rain gardens and bioswales. Giovanni has done some great things throughout the city. I think they're not just good for the environment because they provide for greenery and they bring stormwater into a place that can be absorbed in the ground and used by trees and shrubs. So they're terrific because they make the city more livable and they slow cars down. Because again, we're strangely defining the street to be for many different purposes. So when you're driving down the street, you're realizing this street is not your typical street. I can't drive 40 miles an hour in the street because there's people, crosswalks, there's greenery going into the street, there's curb extensions and parklets. So they're visual cues that really serve to change the environment and again, cause people to be much calmer when they drive. Next slide, please. Now we're getting into the more bicycle specific tools. Sharrows are shared lane markings. They're not bike lanes. They simply are there to remind motorists that cyclists have as much right to be using that street and that lane as a motor vehicle. So they're very good at reminding people to share the street, basically. They're not terribly good for people who aren't accustomed to riding at the speed of travel cars or alongside cars. In that case, bike lanes are better, and that's the next slide. So bike lanes, of course, are defined. So there's an actual space of 4 to 5 feet wide, usually on both sides of the street, so that bicycles travel with the direction of travel of the cars, and they have the protected space of their own travel lane. They're very effective because they're much safer than sharrows and because motorists also respect them. Even if there's no cyclists, they stay off that line. And again, because we're reducing the perceived width of the travel lane, cars slow down, even if there aren't bicyclists there. If there's cyclists there, the cyclists are more visible, everyone has their own space, everyone behaves much more rationally and safely. Next slide, please. Bicycle parking is something we forget to provide because it just makes it convenient and secure to park your bike. It makes the bikes more visible, which again reminds motorists that there's bikes around. I think they're great. This one is beautiful. It's on Chapel. I'm not sure if the city put this in or if a private merchant, but it's a way of making an art statement with something that's very functional and utilitarian. Next slide, please. Bicycle signs. So we don't use it enough because we don't have streets that are identified. But Fountain Street is identified in some city plans as being planned for a bike lane in the future. We want to talk about this tonight as well. I think Becca may have alluded to it, that there's only so much space between curbs. There's not enough space for bike lanes and parking on Fountain Street. So while there's a high demand and actually a lot of cyclists on the street, if we were to provide the bike lanes and the images I just showed, where bikes had their own space, we'd have to take parking off both sides of the street. I think right now it's on one side mainly, sometimes it's on both sides. You can't have, because of the width of the street, you can't have both on-street parking and bike lanes. So it's trade-off, and I think it's a conversation that should be had. Next slide, please. This is where we can talk about the tools, and I'll let Doug facilitate that discussion. But keep in mind that this is, again, to talk more about what you think the opportunities are. And the next workshop, where we bring your ideas and thoughts back to, again, with some concepts and recommendations. So with that, Doug, you can take over.
Thank you, David. And at this point, we'd like to, I believe, turn this over into more of some feedback from our audience participants. Well, and let me pause by thanking Alder Adam Marchand for joining us. I didn't want to stop the conversation earlier at the time, but Alder Marchand has joined us. Thank you so much. I don't know if Alder Marchand, we had a chance to allow Representative Dillon a chance to speak at the top of the meeting. Would you care to unmute yourself and say any thoughts about the district? I know you have a smaller portion of Fountain Street and Whaley Avenue than some of your colleagues, but we welcome the opportunity.
Thank you, Doug. I'm mainly here to see the presentation and hear what members of the public have to say. In regards to Fountain, I would just observe that the report that was presented confirms some of the lived experience that I've had and other residents have reported. There's a lot happening at Fountain and Whaley and at Fountain and Central, and certainly at Fountain and Alden as well. I know less about higher up the hill. So, I'm glad the street's been studied, and I'm eager to hear from residents. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you so much, Alder Marchand. And Sharad, is it your turn to take it away?
No, I'm just trying to look at the chat question that was raised about the image of the protected bike lane. Dave, do you mind answering that question?
Yeah, if I stated the word protected, I misspoke because they are not protected bike lanes. Protected bike lanes would be vertically and horizontally separated from the lane of travel. So the commenter is correct. Those are painted bike lanes that share the same street as the motorists. So cars can creep across the line and often do. So I guess the progression of accommodations would be sharrows first, because it's simply reminding motorists that bicycles can travel in the same lane. Bike lanes that are painted along the travel lane, ideally with some buffer between the parked cars and the bike lanes, because as Becca mentioned, during accidents where motorists will park a car and open the passenger door or the left passenger door or the driver door, and actually inadvertently clip or cause a cyclist to ram into the door, are terribly deadly crashes and need to be carefully considered. So having a bike lane, having a travel lane, a bike lane, a buffer, and then a parking lane is a much safer solution. And then the third hierarchy, the third protected bike lane, which as I mentioned would be completely separate and distinct from the travel lane, so that cars cannot travel onto protected bike lanes.
So while everybody's thinking of some questions, we do have one question for the audience that we've been talking about internally. We want to know So as you know, Dave and I both said, there are limited cross sections. The roads are only so wide, both Fountain Street and Whaley. There's travel lanes for vehicles, and then there's parking lanes on both sides. So we're curious to hear what people would think about giving up parking lanes in favor of bike lanes, understanding that it wouldn't be just one parking lanes. It would more likely than not be both parking lanes. So we want to hear what the thoughts are from the community on that.
And if you wanted to raise your hand through the app, or you can also be called on through the chat. And I see Representative Dillon responding appropriately to the question in the chat. Yep, Joshua.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't know how to raise my hand other than just raising my hand. But I just wanted to jump in real fast as a resident and give a little feedback. I think in general, you know, there's a lot of great work here and studying being done. I'm happy to see that. Really excited to dig into the potential for a WUNRF at Central and Fountain. I think that makes all the sense in the world, and I would hate to see that not happen now. Now that that's been presented, I think anytime that we can give over some livable street space to, especially in a central business district like we have there, it's a no-brainer to me, at least. Would love to see that be activated, and in general, I think the idea of traffic calming in that area too can only be done really successfully with, you know, a change in paving, and the idea of just signage, I just don't think will be too successful. I think in Westville we have some issues with traffic calming and speeds, and people, I guess a culture currently that really does not want to slow down, does not want to recognize crosswalks and things of that nature, which obviously makes your jobs a lot harder. But you know, instead of just throwing a sign up there, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a little more expensive than that. And I just really look forward to hearing some of your comments more about what I've said, and also on your last point, you know, love to see that parking go away and get dedicated bike lanes. I think in a highly residential area like this, the more bike friendly we can be, the better. And I'll jump off. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for the feedback. And David, or I apologize, Carl, if you could put up the WUNRF slide, and if anybody paying attention at home for transportation bingo, WUNRF, you can mark that off your list. A WUNRF is a shared street, one no curbing, one that has, you know, Church Street Burlington is a good example of one. Church Street Burlington, if you've been there, that's the nearest one that I can really think of. I think it's like Platt Street or Pratt Street, I think, in downtown Hartford operates as one for a little while. I'm taking another lane. I'm gonna call on Stacia and Adam in a moment. And if you can just start unmuting, and another prompt, I'll just, you know, some other prompts to think about that Joshua brought up. You know, what would make it more friendly for business in the village is one way to think about a prompt. Another prompt would be, you know, what would, you know, is it safe to walk your child? Or I didn't see any children on the call, but is it safe for young folk to walk to school and things along those lines? So I'll ask Adam and Stacia to unmute and contribute.
Hi there. Thank you, Doug. Yeah, I really appreciate getting to hear about the kind of research that's happening here. And I'm really pleased to hear that there seems to be a lot of support and enthusiasm for improving these very dangerous streets and very fast car focused streets. Something that I'm curious about based on what we're seeing of this complete streets handbook is that, to me, it feels very basic and ineffectual practices. In a lot of cases, we're not seeing slides about protected bike lanes. We're not seeing slides about roundabouts. We're not seeing slides about automatic camera ticketing of cars as well. Does that mean that we can't have those things, or does that mean that we haven't talked about those things? I'd love to put that out there as the saying, instead of going for what's cheapest, that we go for what's best. And similarly, I think that, I wanted to support the previous speaker. I think Joshua, a lot of what he was saying, I fully agree with, that we need to have priorities of walkers, protected bike lanes, smaller streets, and therefore bigger sidewalks and space for pedestrians, which we also know statistically helps businesses as well. If you have more people able to browse, it makes a space feel more lively as well as safe. I really want to see a lot of great work done in that spot. And I pass it to Sasha as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I love your question about being more business friendly. I grew up in New Haven and recently moved back, and it was really exciting to see how much wonderful stuff is in that Westville downtown area that wasn't always the case. And when I think about being business friendly, I think about how businesses make more money from pedestrians and bikers than they do from folks traveling in cars. I think about how we want people to not just visit one store. You don't want them parking right in front of the one store, running in and running out. We want them going to two or more. We want them browsing and really enjoying that space. And that area has such potential for that. But right now is frankly a pretty scary place to traverse, really in any form, whether you're in a car or otherwise.
Thank you both for those comments. And let me just ask Carl to show, if you could bring back to the crash statistics slide. I think it's a very powerful slide that we can speak from as well. So some of the questions you both asked and your comments were very favorable to other things Joshua mentioned, like the roundabouts and other infrastructure. I think something for us to keep in context is that this is a state route. This is a state highway. We are working with state DOT, and so they do have differing focus on their roadway designs, geometric designs, but we're working with our state delegation and collectively as an administration with Mayor Elliker to ask, to make some asks of the DOT. And I think generally, where the DOT is usually very happy to work with you are around places like business centers or around schools or around community centers like post offices or libraries. And so we have a lot of opportunity to leverage our community assets in that way. I think also what we're not yet saying is, we're not showing, what the professionals on the call, we're not yet showing what they think can correct some of these issues that we're raising right now. We're trying to raise the issues to the top, cream the issues off and try and go back and design further. So I think hearing more about your narrowing crossings is what I heard about helping to get shoppers from one store to the next to have that sort of accidental retail experience as well. If I can help kind of frame some of the comments, was that fair, Stacia and Adam?
Stasha.
Stasha.
I think that's one piece of the puzzle for sure, but certainly not the only bit. I mean, a roundabout in that downtown corridor, I think would be a really good thing to explore, because it's quite confusing when you're driving about which ways to go and how to safely get where you're trying to go, and roundabouts we know are so much safer and help with that. It also looks like two-way protected bike lanes, which, as I said, we know the research shows that bikers are more likely they're going to spend more money. Usually every time they go into a place, they spend a little bit less, but over time they spend more money. So once again, helping those businesses. And yeah, bump outs. I definitely am concerned about the idea of paint and cone bump outs because they're bad practice and they're dangerous. This whole idea of worrying about whose tire might be busted. I'd rather a tire be busted than a child's head. So it's like, we don't want the perception of safety where there's not. So you're absolutely right. That's one, but not the only thing.
And I would jump in as well to talk about roundabouts again. And I know there's a little bit of questions in the chat about that. So for example, we were walking around that area yesterday and just kind of looking at what could be different there. And if you're at West Rock and Whaley and Fountain, as you're headed toward that Dunkin' Donuts, when you're headed westbound, that is an enormous area of dead space. And I use that term, to mean several things. And that is an area I could imagine a roundabout, so that, for example, you could close that street between, you could close that last part of Central Ave in between Fountain and Whaley. Someone on Central Ave could turn right, take the roundabout, and then immediately be back on Whaley if they needed to do that. I think that it's a matter of thinking about car efficiency as sort of the lowest priority, and thinking more about how we can make streets more efficient for everybody, and using those spaces in a way to make it feel, you could close that down and have a little parklet or something there as well, and people could have places to sit outside with their food that they got from a restaurant. We're in a pandemic, like that sounds like a great use of space, to have people sitting out there.
That's perfect. And I'm seeing Claire. I'm going to call on you next, and I'll just remind folks of the two prompts three prompts we were having. Where would you like to see better active transportation? Where would it be better to cross the street as a pedestrian, use the roadway as a cyclist, or where do you find it frustrating to pick the bus up? As was shown in the transit slide, there's a lot of transit access. The other prompt was, how can we make it better as a shopping experience, or as a support business, or to help circulate the dollar in our community better? And then the third prompt was, is it safe to walk to school, or walk your child to school, or whatnot? So Claire, I'll call on you next, and I'll just recognize Representative Roland Lamar for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's not your district, but I appreciate you taking the time as the Transportation Committee member and chair. So thanks so much. Claire, would you like to unmute? I'll ask you to unmute.
Hi. So I'm a resident of Yale Avenue, and I'm frequently a pedestrian down in that area where Whaley and Fountain meet up. I am all for bike lanes on both sides of Whaley and on Fountain, and I have no problem with losing the parking, but I would still be very nervous about riding in an unprotected bike lane on those streets, because the speeding is so bad. So I wouldn't want to see unprotected bike lanes with no other traffic calming measures. I think it's really, especially as a pedestrian and with young children, there's a lot of red light running, stop sign rolling, and things like that. Also I'm glad to see that you're including the stretch on Whaley. It's very hard to cross the street on Whaley. The lights are, the pedestrian signals are few and far between, especially at Central and Whaley. It feels like I have to wait like 5 minutes, and the light will change multiple times for cars without a pedestrian signal. So that's really frustrating. And at Blake, there's a lot of red light running, which makes me really nervous. So especially in that business district, it seems like there could be a lot done to make it more pedestrian friendly. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I think that was one of our first comments on the Whaley Blake area intersection as well. I think as the mouse is being pointed over right there, and you can tell there's a lot of transit access. Does anyone have any thoughts about the bus service or the bus lines coming in, or the bus stops or bus shelters? And I also want to recognize Lizzie Donius. I don't know if Lizzie, if you wanted to chime in or just take your camera off.
Sorry.
No, but I in recommending your representation of the business community, if you wanted to.
Yes. Well, I too wanted to hear what people were going to say, but we're so thrilled as the head of WBRA. Like, I'm really excited about this study and all of the thought that's going into on what's happening here. We love David Souza, who worked on the Westville plan that founded Woodruff many, many years ago. So we know that this project is in good hands. From a business community perspective, I do think there might be some concern about losing parking, and I would second what people are saying about the protected bike lanes. That seems like an excellent trade-off to me, especially on Fountain Street, where you're really talking about a limited amount of commercial parking, really limited. You know, I hesitate to speak for any of the businesses, especially Camacho, which just went in, but a protected bike lane that comes down Fountain, goes into Whaley, you know, that seems personally a no-brainer to me as a bike rider, mother, resident in Westville. And I do think I would just echo what everyone's saying, that as there's some trade-offs. What we have for street parking in Westville is not that much. What we gain from like true traffic calming in Westville is going to benefit all of the businesses and all of the other efforts we're making in Westville, you know, to grow the economy, to grow the art culture. What I often say when I've been pitching people on storefronts, developers, whatever, is our challenge is that we are a walking village on a state highway. We're actually a walking village on 2 state highways. So everything that makes this less of a walking village on a state highway and more of a walking village, I feel in my gut we're going to see that benefit in every way in the growth of Westville Village.
Thank you for the share. And again, folks that want to comment, if you would like to continue the conversation, please just raise your hand or unmute yourself. I did want to appreciate being joined by Giovanni Zinn, our city engineer, who's been active in the chat. Thank you for your attendance tonight and for your work always. Are there, so I did hear about crosswalk timings, and I did hear about some folks saying distances between crosswalks. I did, you know, I'll probably do this for the rest of my career, but I wanted to take a moment to appreciate Representative Dillon for helping the city win the battle and get an additional crosswalk at West Rock and Whaley Avenue there, right in front of Lyric Hall. You know, it really has, I've used it a number of times and I've appreciated your work every time I cross it myself, but it really just shows that more crossings matter. I hear a lot of complaints from folks trying to cross between Duncan and, is it 9 West, you know, crossing on that side, on the east side of Whaley Avenue. If other people don't share, you'll just listen to me blather for a while. There was a question about dedicated bus lanes. I wonder if someone from CDM Smith could take a question about dedicated bus lanes. What are they? Why do you use them? And what would they be good for?
Sure, Doug, I can do that. This is Sharat from CDM Smith. So the dedicated bus lanes here would be somewhat difficult. The reason being of the street width that's available, as I think Becca was mentioning. To even put bike lanes, we have to take away parking, which the dedicated bus lanes would be a lane width wide in each direction. And there has to be a good amount of frequency of the buses to be on Fountain to have that. This would take away a lot of traffic, create more traffic issues in Fountain because traffic would have to go elsewhere. So we are not looking at dedicated bus lanes because it's not enough bus frequency to warrant that. Also, it would require us to look at potentially widening Fountain Street, which is something that we are trying not to get into because that would create more problems with sidewalks and right-of-way and things like that. So that's kind of our initial take at it. I mean, we can certainly look at it. We just don't know if that is going to be a good solution here.
No, go ahead. Yeah. Sure.
So Doug, I also wanted to take a question of, I think there was a question by someone regarding protected bike lanes. I believe we answered that question or not, but I think on that one, we will probably much better to look at that, because I think protected bike lanes, we could potentially make it work with available street width we have. There's some buffer that's there available between the sidewalk and the curb line. So we might be able to extend the curb a bit to get that additional buffer. It's right now, the street cross section varies about 35, 36 feet to about 38 feet, roughly, I think. So that's, kind of in the ballpark of 2 travel lanes, 1 in each direction, plus a bike lane in each direction. So it's just wide enough to accommodate 2 travel lanes and 2 bike lanes. And a protected bike lane, for example, would require some kind of a buffer, at least 3 to 4 feet between the edge of the travel lane and the bike lane. So given that constraint of the street width, and also we would like to provide something that's continuous. We don't want to start a bike lane and it would have to end because we can't maintain that width. So that's going to be one of the things we'll look at as we are looking at these solutions.
And there's also a question in the chat regarding forced walks instead of beg buttons. And I believe some of the signals in this corridor actually already have the traffic signals set up during the Sabbath to have automatic walk signals come on. So I think that's something.
Yeah, so that is a great question. So forced walk versus beg buttons. We right now during our COVID response, we're actually, all of our traffic signals are set to have all exclusive pedestrian recall, every single traffic signal. So what we're talking about is whether or not cars go, stop all car traffic for pedestrians to go around. And so at the moment, the former DOT standard was to have it that way. We actually work with our faith community in the area to make sure that all holidays in Jewish faith, as well as Saturday, all Saturdays, all of the traffic signals happen automatically. Our overall goal is to switch to a new standard called concurrent with leading pedestrian interval. That was just approved in the state of Connecticut in 2020 as a possible standard to use. And that would be, if you're interested to put it in the chat, it's something to Google. It's pretty cool. It's little nuanced tricks like this in our policy manuals and our ways of doing this can lead to a lot of safety. But what we're definitely hearing is more time for pedestrians to cross the street. And Becca mentioned in her evaluation at the top of the hour that some of the traffic signal timings were not up to the latest standards. So that's something that we're going to want to study and look at and continue.
Yeah, to build from Sharat's response to the possibility of protected bike lanes in Fountain Street, we could look at two solutions, one being one-way bike lanes on each side of the street. In other words, an eastbound bike lane on the south side and a westbound bike lane on the north side, as well as having both protected bike lanes on one side of the street. This benefits, there's pros and cons to each. One of the considerations is where there may be bus pull-offs for bus transit riders. Another consideration is where there's a pull-off for school buses at the Morris Sheridan School. So we need to consider those, again, competing interests and understand how each of those possible solutions might work or might be modified to work.
In response to the concern about the trade-offs between the parking and other kinds of uses for that, it's really hard for me to generalize, having learned the hard way, and it's wonderful to learn in a way. small differences small changes can make an enormous difference in your business. And also who I would have predicted might have issues with, let's say, a bicycle lane were not always who I thought they would be. And also the location and the type of business doesn't necessarily, and given that the costs of doing business, especially for somebody small like that, are very high, our fixed costs are high. They really have to be brought into the conversation to make sure that that trade-off is not going to be at their expense. And I guess I'm thinking in particular of, well, I don't want to mention any particulars that are still with us, but there's a corner in Yale and Whaley that used to have a place that had ice cream and made cheesecakes and chocolate. And a number of, it wasn't clear if you pulled up to pick up your cheesecake, whether that was a park lane or people were moving. And the owner there had a number of customers get rear-ended when they parked there. And when we had a conversation about whether or not taking away the parking would be a remedy, he didn't think so. He moved to another town after that. But there were other issues with that location, but I want to make sure that everybody's in the conversation so that we know exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Representative Dillon, because you're correct. Every block represents a different set of circumstances, a different set of considerations. So speaking about Fountain Street first, getting rid of parking on Fountain Street may not be terribly inconvenient for residents because either they have driveways or the side streets they could park on. Where we have to have a conversation is with churches and synagogues and other religious institutions that may that street for services, for parking for services, or for funerary processions. Also, I mentioned bus pullouts for the school, but also parent drop-off for kids on Fountain. If that's happening on Fountain, is there a way we can move that again to another street or behind the school? We'd have to study that. One of the benefits of Fountain Street in this discussion is that if you were able to get rid of parking for most of the length where there's no retail, in other words, from Central all the way to the west, there's, I think, no retail. The retail begins at Central and continues east towards Whaley. And because on-street parking is critical for retail businesses, there may be another solution on that block or 2 blocks, which would be, because the sidewalks are especially wide there, we could carve a protected bike lane out of the sidewalk and have plenty of space for pedestrians as well. So my point is that the solution of a protected bike lane might look different from block to block. We have to be careful about how different, because we don't want to be confusing both the motorists and the cyclists. So it's going to.
Well, my point was just that, and I was stunned at some of the conversations I found myself in when people pushed back against a number of things that we need to be attentive and respectful to who's there and try to think through the consequences of every decision we're making. I know that's really hard. Believe me, I know it's hard. But,
it is, yeah.
But it can torpedo a remedy if we don't think it through.
I'd like to add to what Pat's saying, just the example that she gave, and just thinking specifically of businesses on Whaley Avenue. Whaley Avenue retailers right now are very dependent on their parking spaces. And that's the culture of business on Whaley right now. You can't operate out of that storefront without being able to have somebody pull in front, or, I'll call out Gabe, but I don't know what he'd say about his own parking space, but people pull in front of the frame shop to run in. And this is how business has operated on Whaley for a long time. People drive by 26,000 cars, they see cute things, and then they come for one. And they don't, as somebody already said, stay and walk around. We're just beginning to start to build that culture in Westville with the new restaurants, with a lot of positive things that are happening. So I definitely hear what Pat's saying, and that these businesses definitely need to know and be involved in the conversation. And the trade-off that I see is the quality and investment in true traffic calming. If we can transform this small area, West Rock to Phillips Street of Whaley, into a place where people drive slowly and respect that space as the kind of commercial district we all see in our heads, that trade-off will be worth it. People will park their car and they will come to Westville, and they'll eat at Bella's, and they'll shop at Melissa's shop, and they'll go to Gabe's store, and they'll walk down the street. But I do think that requires real traffic calming, real investment in traffic calming. David, as you said, the Fountain Street piece seems simpler to me as well. The Whaley Avenue merchants who are all having a rough year, this is definitely true. They require those parking spaces right now. We take the parking spaces away. We need to be making the investment and the best efforts to make sure that we're transforming Westville into the kind of place where people expect to drive slow on a narrow street and stay.
Right. If I could just build on that, Lizzie, I agree entirely. I'd go so far as to say that bike lanes on Whaley are not very viable for the reasons you mentioned. And as you know, I work through downtown merchant business districts throughout the country on understanding how to make their downtowns more walkable, more accessible, more vibrant. And parking in front of merchants that are small scale merchants like you have in Westville is critical. But there is, so I honestly don't think bike lanes on Whaley are viable, at least between West Rock and Blake. That said, I think there's an alternative to build from a future, multi-purpose lane through the park, through Edgewood Park, crossing Whaley near West Rock, and then going behind Westville, going behind Whaley on West Rock, paralleling the Mill River, and then maybe daylighting out on Blake and finding its way to Valley Street. So those are the type of solutions we need that can allow the merchants to operate as they require with the critical parking and allow for better bicycle access to Westville. But that still raises the challenge of bicycle travel on Fountain. So we do have a tall bill to fill here.
Andy, or if you say?
Oh, thanks, Doug. Hi. A couple of things. We don't need parking on Fountain Street. It's like darn near all residential, and yeah, there's 3 businesses. We don't need parking on Fountain Street. There's a ton of parking in downtown Westville. You got the big old Muni lot. Let Doug collect $2 an hour from people. You can afford $18 tacos. You can spend $2 on parking. I said it there. I agree that you shouldn't ride your bicycle on Whaley Avenue. I'm surprised, given that chart y'all had about the accidents, that it wasn't triple that at the Whaley Fountain disaster zone. It'd be great to see something that could be done there that's less awful. I actually crossed it on foot yesterday, and it wasn't that bad. I have to say the traffic signal was good right there at West Rock and Whaley, going to the park. I made some notes here. Was this meeting also going to talk about the half a block of Central Avenue between Fountain and Whaley? One of my favorite days of the year is when Lizzie gets her friends to shut it down and make it awesome. It's only good for parking cars and for an inconvenient traffic light. And it'd be really swell to do something useful with that. Don't get me started about developing that fallow lot that shouldn't just be held in reserve by people to not do anything with. But it'd be amazing if we could do something pedestrian focused there. I saw a comment earlier in the comment section about how do you get from Central to Whaley. There's 100 ways to do that. And think about the greater good of downtown Westville and our vibrant little community that people have been spending so much time and money and resources and energy to make better. There's something better, I'm sure, a better use or more positive use that we could do with that little half a block than park 2 cars and just have a fire hydrant on most of the time. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you. I see another comment from Stasia and Adam.
Hi again. Yeah, glad to hear a lot more support even for narrowing, slowing these streets to cars and creating more space and vibrancy for everyone else outside of cars who also, as I think we see with these corridors, also tend to be the people who live in the area and need to get around those areas safely to enjoy that. I'm sorry to hear that there's a lot of pushback against bicycling on Whaley, for example, or limiting parking on Whaley. I think that that's an example of a street where it's only as good as we make it. I mean, I agree it's not currently safe for biking on. I would barely do it myself. And I think that it's a very short-sighted for us to say, therefore it can't be safe for biking. I think that is kind of sounds like giving up to me, kind of sounds like a failure to use some imagination on that corridor. But I think that both those areas, especially where they pass through heavily populated areas, heavily residential, as well as business areas, need to be better. I mean, we need to do what use every tool in the toolbox to make those better for people's lives. And that includes people in cars. We don't need to be thinking, how do we move cars through there faster? We see that there's a lot of crashes, even when you're not putting bikers and pedestrians into the equation, because the streets are not safe for drivers either. So I think that when we talk about traffic calming and slowing speeds and all that, that's important for drivers too, even if it feels counterproductive to the efficiency of speeding cars.
Perfect, thank you. Dave Sherratt, Becca, anyone to respond? Thanks, Sherratt.
So I can take that. Dave, go ahead.
I was just going to agree with Adam that there are opportunities to make Whaley better. And I agree that speeds are counterproductive to quiet enjoyment of the neighborhood, as well as placemaking. And placemaking is critical to establishing places that businesses can thrive and maximize profits in their customer base. So I'm always fascinated by this because cars are given free rein and we try to make it as frictionless and as speedy as possible to go from point A to point B, when in reality, you're constrained by the traffic signals. So if you drive 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour along Whaley Street, you're not going to get to your destination any slower than if you drive 30 miles an hour. It's just a the time is lost at the intersections. So that said, we need to encourage slow travel, and that's going to encourage not only more walking, but also make the street safer for cycling. So I don't think we should prohibit cycling on Whaley. I'm just cautious about a dedicated bike lane or even a protected bike lane on Whaley. So there's different alternatives, and you're right, there are many tools that we could explore.
Representative Dillon, thank you for raising your hand.
Thank you. I just think it's important. I have no particular interest in saying one thing has to happen in one place or one thing cannot happen. But I do feel, well, that's not true. I do want a pedestrian refuge in Upper Whaley Avenue, but talking about the area of interest here, which is Fountain Street and the the little notch there when you go over into Whaley. But there have been conversations for a long time that didn't do well because not everyone was included when it came down to this. And I don't think that anybody should be shamed for saying so. It's really when they discovered that something is happening and they weren't told, it's really quite an extraordinary experience to be confronted by someone who feels that way when they believe their business is at stake. I think there are many remedies if we make changes to traffic patterns there that don't have to necessarily disrupt an individual business, but they need to be part of the conversation.
Thank you, and that's noted. I saw all of the consultant team shaking their heads with their hands down, which meant they were taking notes. And please feel free to go on some more, Representative Dillon, if you wanted to speak again. Okay. And so, you know, during this time of pandemic, folks from the neighborhood found themselves walking anywhere where they weren't expecting, you know, pre-pandemic, during pandemic, anywhere they're struggling more. I know that you had mentioned, Representative Dillon, up Whaley getting but also up Fountain Street. I know we've heard from, I heard Kate Rosen from Woodbridge mentioned some issues up on up Fountain Street as well. So I just wanted to keep the conversation going and not shut it down. And perhaps if Carl, you could flip through some more of the slides and we could generate some ideation from folks as we zoom in. Yes, Lizzie.
I just wanted to clarify that, you know, I definitely do not think we should throw out the idea of getting rid of parking on Whaley. I think that idea should be on the table and be a part of a discussion. I just personally, and speaking for Woodbridge, have a grand vision for Westville where all of these things happen. And I think that those are the things that are the best for the businesses. I think the pedestrian universe on Central Avenue between Fountain and Whaley, we've closed that one time. Doug, you'll remember we closed it to put the pods up for Citywide Open Studios, and pods just refused to come pick them up for like a week. So I had a permit for 4 days, and I think it was closed for 11 days. And I was asking, and nobody said anything to me. And people call me, people call Pat, people call Adam, and then maybe they'll call me and find out what I'm doing with my pods. Nothing. I'm not saying it won't cause any trouble, but we have been consistently closing Central and activating Central as a pedestrian plaza for a number of years now, to great success. I'm with Andy. Friday Night Art Walk is the thing that I miss the most during this pandemic. You know, I feel like in my dreams that is a very, very active, beautiful, mostly public place that functions as kind of a center square for our neighborhood. And so I want to see that happen, and I want to see as much traffic calming as we can muster in the village. But I am sensitive as a person who works with the business owners and will hear from all of them that Pat is absolutely right, that those parking spaces perform a function right now. And so if they were to go away, we would have to be replacing them with something of value to our downtown community. I think that that's a worthy goal.
Thank you, Lizzie.
I would like to add to that if we could use the Dunkin' Donuts slots, and I realize but some of the reason that people go crazy over this is that you have huge areas in the center there that are not or roped off for parking, and that is Dunkin' Donuts and and the old Delaney saw it, so that you find yourself in these rabbit holes of conversations where people talk about things that we don't have control over. But the reason that we worked for 4 years on the crosswalk to Lyric Hall was to make that area walkable. It was part of the vision. And I think it should go forward. But there has to be, there is a connection between Fountain Street and Whaley Avenue and I think a roundabout would be a great idea.
Thank you, Representative Dillon. And I'll ask Andy to, again, unmute in a moment. If anybody else would like to chime in, please don't hesitate. And if folks from the study could enter the contact information for how people can email additional comments and follow up with us, that would be, that's terrific. Thank you, Carl. And I would just mention, as Giovanni's mentioning, the green stormwater in response to some folks, you know, one of the best elements in well, obviously Edgewood Park is Edgewood Park, but, you know, the West River Greenway does loop back into the back of the business area, the district there, some residential as well. I think we all, and so I'm just, you know, one more prompt for you would be like, what's a barrier to using the Greenway, or what's a benefit of the Greenway for your neighborhood, or have you used the Greenway to get anywhere in your neighborhood as of late? Andy, I'll ask you to chime back in. I think you saw your hand up. If you would.
I didn't, but I might have been itching my head, but I'm on the Greenway actually a lot, and it's a really nice benefit. I don't have much else to add. I did have a question though, and I don't, this might be rhetorical. It's great to see the planning happening with regard to the Fountain Street corridor. Is this done with any relation to the city's economic development department? I noticed they're not on, I don't think anyone from economic development's on the call. I didn't see the names in the list, but you know, thinking about the former Delaney spot, the future aberration that is 500 Blake Street turning into 1 million apartments. Sorry, that's an opinion. But it's a lot goes on, and it seems like things happen in a vacuum. So we're looking at, you know, you've got that great Greenway spot. It's going to be shadowed between two large structures, at least the section that's in downtown Westville. You know, you've got that many more people potentially moving into downtown Westville, into the village. And then we're talking about more parking issues. I don't know if that's all being taken into consideration.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So I sit in the economic development spectrum, and we're going to be forwarding this video recording to our partners, but also, yes, they're involved in the back end of the planning and the work on the team study. Thank you for that. That's a great question. There's a lot of activity in Westville happening right now, and a lot of potential activity. And wearing the parking authority hat that I can sometimes wear, I would say that there's a lot of privately held, privately managed parking assets that would be much better utilized and maximized if they were all socialized into one broader, management scheme of parking in the back there. Joshua, you've unmuted. Did you want to chime in?
Yeah, there are a couple of things I can talk about. Since the Greenway is most recent, I guess the question would be, has there been any discussion on a potential connection from Edgewood Park along the Greenway into West Rock Park? That seems like a really underutilized path, and not the most beautiful one at that. I know there's a lot of maybe private land ownership along there. Maybe that's a cause for concern, but just curious if there's been any discussions about how we can really take advantage of it and remediate it, et cetera, et cetera. And then my other comment would be in reference to the gentleman that was talking about the old Delaney's lot. And for me, we found ourselves walking towards Beecher Park a lot recently. And I think the potential to bookend the new, hopefully new Woonarf on Central Ave between Fountain and Whaley, and an underutilized beach or park, which could potentially be something with, you know, a nice amphitheater and connection down there to maybe who knows, a new development above that existing city parking lot with what seems to be a vacant old Messianic temple. I'm not sure exactly what that building is, but it seems extremely, it's a huge eyesore. And I think that the idea of like bookending the village with something, you know, potentially beautiful that could go there could be really great. And I just would love to know everyone's thoughts.
Thank you for that. And Lizzie, did you want to chime in on that? I heard.
Yeah, I think I can clarify a few things. I'll start backwards. One is the Old Masonic Temple is owned by the Church of Scientology. And if you know anything about the Church of Scientology real estate practices nationwide, they are fans of land banking. They have owned that building for more than 14 years. And we have had no luck convincing them that they should sell it. So that is a sticky wicket that I personally am at a loss as to how to move. But beyond that, the West River Watershed Coalition and others have been very interested in developing the West River Greenway all the way from Bethany to West Haven. And as you already pointed out, Edgewood Park and West Rock Park are connected by that small strip behind the river, behind the village, which has a walk on it now that does not have a lane. I think it was done as an Army Corps of Engineers project. There is not enough space right now for a bike lane, like a full lane. That is something the Watershed Coalition's advocated for a long time, as well as access at the end of Tour Avenue to be able to get onto that walkway. The development that is going in at 500 Blake Street, which takes up a big chunk of that, was those developers were agreed to kind of redesign thanks to working closely with the city and I think some neighbors, that piece that was along the river to make sure that that river walkway was expanded and enhanced, including public space and enough space for bikes and stuff. So that is a place where, you know, I don't know what it entails to expand or improve that walkway, but, you know, it could be more compliant. I think that's all that I know stuff about.
I think that's a great comment. Just to note on the facilities around the area, or, you know, if it's even slightly out the study, I think it's important to know where walkers are being destinated. You know, that's a destination for walkers to go to Riverwalk. It's a destination to walk into Edgewood Park. I think we're about almost at end of time. So I'll see if there's a few more hands. I noticed Andy unmuted. If you wanted to share have any more thoughts.
Sorry, I should have wrote all my notes down earlier. I just like bit by bit. I saw some stuff in the chat about bus, and I don't know if this conversation or if this project takes into account buses at all. The reason I don't take the bus much, I live at the, Adam used the term bottom of the hill. I live at the top of the hill up on Lawn Crest. We pretty much don't get bus service after like 6:30, 7 o'clock, and I work a lot of late evenings, so it just makes me a car user all the way. I just throwing that out there, and that actually makes me wonder, you know, in the terms of like the Westville area, is there data around how many households are truly car free, solely relying on buses or alternate forms of transportation, other modes of transportation that aren't cars? And I'm going to do this in bullets. And then lastly, I put this in the chat earlier, but I love red light cameras, and we should have those. So that's it. Please.
Thank you. I won't touch the second one, which is a legislative item, and the first one is the car-free household. David Sherrod, Becca, I don't know if we had a slide on transit propensity scores prepared yet for the corridor.
We don't. Sorry,
Dave,
we don't. No.
Okay, we'll have that for the report out meeting, I think, for our next public meeting.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll ask David if you'd like to wrap us up, and unless anybody has any final. Again, if someone from the team could share the contact information one more time. Carl, you've been a great slideshow technician, and I think that's a new job in 2020. And if somebody could copy and paste it into the chat too, so then people could just hyperlink out. I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. We'll be in touch shortly, and I'll ask David or folks from CDM to wrap it up.
Yeah, so I can do that.
So I was just going to say that we're taking notes as well as copying all of the comments on the chat box, and we'll be sure to put it into the record and study all these different options and alternatives, and have something to discuss in more concrete detail the next time. Sure.
Yeah, and we're thinking probably sometime late February, early March, maybe sooner, because there's a lot of good ideas that came about. But we'll be certainly welcoming any comments. So if you have any comments, if you can pass those around as, you know, by the date that's on December, just because of the holidays, it'll be good to collect that information and for us to kind of digest all the information. And this was really a good platform for us to gather a lot of feedback and input into our project. So appreciate everything that we heard today.
For the audio record, we should read the email for accepting comments up until December 18th. Ideally. And that email is HALLRR@CDM, as cat, dog, Mary, Smith, SMITH.com. I'll read it one more time. Hall, HALLRR@CDMSmith.com.
Oops.
Thanks, Dave, for doing that.
Perfect time that I got a coughing fit right when I was about to speak, but I just want to thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have more thoughts. And if, yeah, we'll have this recording be available shortly online, and we'll share it back with folks that we can. So thank you all again for coming so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.